to our second episode of the Razorback Chats. Today we have John Fagg here, who is a deputy athletic director here at University of Arkansas, and he also kind of oversees academic integrity and student athlete development. But this week we'll be talking about social issues with John. So John, if you could just kind of start, kind of give us a little bit about your background, like where you're from, where you went to school, and some positions you've held before you got to Arkansas.
So again, my name is John Fagg. Please call me John. If you feel a need to call me Mr. Fagg, you can, but that will make Sydney laugh, and so you can't do that. Sydney and I work closely together. Her desk is right down the hall from me, so I see her all the time. So I'm 53 years old. I say that with great pride because I am in my 53rd year in college athletics. I was born into college athletics. My father was a college football coach. Career assistant at places like Georgia Tech, South Carolina, Arizona. I was really fortunate, though, when I was 10, my father took the offensive coordinator job at the University of Hawaii. So I actually grew up in Honolulu, which is really cool experience, especially as I get older. You know, the most diverse place in the world, the most isolated place on earth, literally. And so that was a really interesting experience that I draw on pretty often. Started school at Hawaii, started college at Hawaii, finished at the University of Arizona, transferred there. My dad left and took a coaching job at Arizona. Started my career at Arizona as a coach. I was a football coach for almost 10 years. So I coached in Division I, II, and III, Arizona, Davidson College, a little school in North Carolina, Division II at a little school called Mars Hill College in Western North Carolina. Transitioned into administration, semi at Mars Hill, a little school like that. You have to have two jobs often. And so you either had to teach or you had to have an administrative job. And so I was the first compliance officer in the history of the school. And that led me into compliance as a field. And if you don't know exactly what compliance is, that's all the NCAA rules. So I handle eligibility and playing and practice seasons, recruiting, monitoring, all these things with our staff. So I transitioned to that, worked for a conference called the Big South Conference for a year in North Carolina, moved to Fresno, California, worked at Fresno State for 4 years as assistant athletic director for compliance. Back to North Carolina again in Raleigh, where I was assistant and associate AD for compliance and some other things I can't remember, hard to remember. It's been a long time. And was there for 7 years, and then have been here for almost 13. And I am deputy athletic director here and currently oversee academics, compliance, student athlete development, and I'm the football sport administrator. And I've also overseen a bunch of other stuff since I've been here. Just about every area of the department I've overseen at some point. So that's quick. That's the quick version. So.
We're going to get more into the social issues topics. And there's a lot of social issues in sports that we talk about through our classes. So we just selected a handful of them. And so I'm going to go ahead and frame some of these questions for the rest of our audience before I actually get to the question. That way everyone's kind of on the same page. So to start, we're going to talk about the executive order that President Biden recently signed into effect back in January. It's one of a handful that he signed into effect, and it enforces a Supreme Court decision that was actually made last year that expanded the definition of sex discrimination to include the discrimination based on sexual orientation as well as gender identity. And it had language that explicitly referred to high school and college sports. And it also applies now to Title IX violations. So with that now being in effect, in your opinion, how do you think that legislation is going to affect collegiate sports as a whole?
So I actually appreciated this question more than the others. I mean, not that they're all great questions, but I actually had to go look it up. I wasn't up to speed that he had signed something, to be honest with you. And so I went and looked it up. So again, appreciate that. I don't think it will change a bunch. I think the Trump administration have been going down a path like Republican administrations do often, to a little more rights for the the overrepresented sex, men's rights, for lack of a better way to put it. Not quite as strict enforcement of Title IX legislation and regulations. I think this was, the way I viewed it, was more of a restatement that we're going back to what it was for the last 8 years under the Obama administration. And then I do think the gender identity stuff is again a restatement that's important. That was definitely heading a different direction under the Trump administration. And so I think while transgender and things like that, those athletes are not commonplace in college sports, they are getting much more commonplace in high school sports. So I think it will affect high school more than college. We've done a lot of research and given a lot of thought to what a transgender athlete experience would look like here, through various decisions that we don't have an official policy yet, but we have one probably ready if we needed one. And so there are some thoughts about, whether what medications they're taking and things like that. A transgender female is often taking, estrogen and things like that to suppress testosterone. A transgender male is taking testosterone. And so there are some questions about that actually, especially taking testosterone supplements. So overall, I don't think it will make a huge difference, but I do think it is personally a step forward in the right direction.
There's currently 17 states with bills kind of in their legislative process that would prohibit transgender athletes from competing in sports in the gender in which they identify. And in the past, there have been legislation passed, such as North Carolina's bathroom bill back in 2016. And that actually ended up leading to the NCAA pulling 7 championships that were set to be held in that state that year and relocating them elsewhere. If more legislation in different states was passed like that, do you think the NCAA would follow suit there and try and host events in states with more liberal legislation? Or do you think that's too much of a burden for them to try and relocate that many events?
Personal take is, probably at some level, unfortunately, yeah, I think if there were more bills passed like that, it would force the NCAA to probably give in and host and have championships in those states or in some of those states, probably. I don't know what that tipping point would be. I do know that they make efforts to ensure that those kind of rights are upheld. There are different perspectives on whether that's a smart thing to do or whether the NCAA should stay out of those kind of political conversations. But the bottom line is, when you really get down to it, especially in college, transgender participation is incredibly rare when you really get down to it. There was a case of a swimmer at Harvard a couple of years ago, a trans male. I would actually be incredibly interested if any of you know a trans athlete who is competitive, and I don't mean that sarcastically. I mean, if you know somebody, I don't. And so I strive very hard to have as diverse a set of relationships as possible. I have some trans friends that I know and have talked to and about their experiences. But if you have a trans athlete that I would love to get that contact information, because it just really doesn't occur very much.
There have been a lot of universities at the Division I level that have cut non-revenue sports, including like baseball, softball, men's soccer, men's and women's tennis. So like you're seeing it on both male and female sports. But there have been no schools so far that have cut men's basketball or football, which are both considered obviously the biggest revenue sports for most universities. Do you think that there could be any Title IX complaints coming from these cuts?
There actually have been a few already, some of it kind of leading in from the pandemic, they were already probably in play at some level. But I looked up a little bit. Dartmouth, Brown are both having issues. But again, I'm kidding a little bit. I like to kid, like to have a little bit of a fun. So so they don't count in our world, right? That's Ivy League, that's somewhere else. In our world, Michigan State is being sued by swim and divers for cutting men's and women's swimming and diving currently. They're working hard to get that reinstated. There have been a few others for sure, but I just looked up a couple of quick examples to show really the Dartmouth and Brown examples are how what I call a normal world of sports is operating, and then sometimes we're a little bit less normal, if you understand what I mean by that. There's so much revenue at stake for us, so many more layers to the whole thing with us. But I do think I think there will continue to be Title IX questions about it, especially when women's sports are dropped. There are metrics that have to be met. And so I would be surprised if those schools are dropping sports like that, knowing the metrics. Sorry. my life is pretty interesting. Someone just brought me a space heater because I'm freezing. So I'm sorry about that. But I do think that hopefully they're making the right calculations, knowing that if they're dropping women's sport, that they know how many participant opportunities there are. And I think there will continue to be issues because, there's allegations that these were excuses to drop sports, not real financial issues. So that's going to be tough. So, to me, the football and basketball thing, yes, they are revenue generators, but they are mostly at schools are a combination of revenue opportunities as opposed to real revenue sources, especially at smaller schools. And good, bad, or indifferent, the culture that says football is the most important. Sorry to Austin, that at some level, that football being the most important is a decision, not an outcome, right? And so I'm always fascinated with that. I've worked at schools that none of the sports make enough money. The whole thing is a drain, and so it's always fascinating when people keep football at schools that don't have those kind of revenue. Here, it would be obvious whether we like it or not, that we would need to keep football.
Do you think then, also going back to like the cuts being made, that it could be seen as just discrimination against I'm going to say it again, non-revenue sports?
Yeah. So the way I describe it is, it seems to me there's a section of these cuts, or a percentage of these cuts, that are, again, kind of an excuse to get leaner. So you hear lots of the conferences speak about broad-based sports programs, meaning they, University of North Carolina is an easy example, just because I like to pick on them because I worked at NC State. And so, they have like 34 sports. They have like the maximum number of sports. And so them dropping sports, they've been supporting them all this time. We're going to make it through the pandemic, and revenues will come back, at least for the most part. And so if they cut sports, that's an excuse. They're using the pandemic as a reason to get leaner. And so I think there are some schools out there doing that kind of stuff. SEC is a little different. If you look across our portfolio of schools, we are not necessarily we don't describe ourselves always as a broad-based sports program. We describe ourselves a little leaner and meaner. We want to win national championships in every sport every year. And, others just, quite frankly, don't have quite that same drive. And it's nothing wrong with it. My time in the ACC was just different. I thought the SEC would be about exactly the same as the ACC, and it took me literally 1 week to realize how different it was. This place is, this conference is a lean, mean fighting machine, so to speak.
And I guess even though these cuts, I guess, didn't happen here, since you are the athletic director, the deputy athletic director that oversees like student athlete development.
Sure.
If you were at one of those schools, like, what would you do to kind of help prepare those athletes that, whose teams just got cut, to either transition into like the transfer portal and prepare to like leave where they've been for a couple of years,
Sure.
or to prepare them, to kind of just have to quit their sport very abruptly?
So, one of the things that we talk about that is basically the only common denominator among athletes in sports is that sports end, right? Whether they end like me after high school because I wasn't that good, or they end after 20 years like my friend Philip Rivers just retired. And Philip and I were really close when he was at NC State. And Philip Rivers plays for 18 or 20 years or whatever the heck he played for, and makes $100 million or whatever, more than that probably. Life still goes on. At some point, sports is an incredibly finite amount of time. And so we do stuff already to try to get people prepared for life after sports. You see some of them on our screen who are, graduate assistants for us, like Sydney, things like that for sure. We have what we call a Razorback Ready program that has a curriculum of things that they do freshman, sophomore, junior year. We have core classes and we have electives, literally putting it in educational terms, that they need to accomplish while they're here, and we track that. We have a career services department dedicated to try to find internships and full-time jobs, things like that. We have a thing that we're just about to roll out called the entrepreneurial mindset, that goes with name, image, likeness legislation and brand development and things like that. That really is going to question. We're going to start it with our freshmen here in the summer, and actually have a pilot program here in a few weeks, but we'll start with our freshmen in the summer, and it will challenge them to think about why they're here. And so real quick, so what happens, especially for us at our level, why do people come to the University of Arkansas as a student athlete? The first thing, and this is sometimes I think controversial for people to think about, the one thing they all have in common is they're coming here to play sports. Like, that's an obvious thing when you really get down to it, but they're coming here to play sports. So if we start with a circle of everybody in it with sports, some percentage less than 100 wants to go to school, right? Okay. And I know I'm going the opposite direction. I'm doing it for a reason. Okay. Some percentage less than that wants to graduate from college. I love to pick on baseball players because it's fun. Like the baseball team, literally, we don't want any of them to graduate at some level. We want them all to go pro and make millions of dollars, right? So that's weird. And then some less have a plan to do what they're going to do. Sports, school, outcome, right? We want them out here. We want them thinking big, not thinking small. And so that entrepreneurial mindset program, I think, is going to make a difference. But the point of that is to answer the question that, yeah, we start with the end in mind. We start with them trying to get them to think about life after sports, if at all possible.
Situations like you were mentioning with baseball, where we want them to go pro, if they're that good, like, go do it. Assuming they don't graduate, what kind of resources do we have here that helps them, say, like, once they're done playing baseball professionally, to come back and be able to, finish their degree?
We try to have them on a plan to graduate, to be on track to graduate. So whenever they come back, they can pick it back up. When I first got here, we had to revamp the academic program. We focused on eligibility rather than graduation, which a lot of people do, and that's fine. The thought process is if you remain eligible, you will graduate at the end, right? Except we realized that there were people with 12 hours left to graduate, except those were 12 hours of foreign language. Last time I checked, you can't do 12 hours of foreign language in one semester, right? You had 2 years left. So we started revamping that thought process to make sure we're mixing in those barrier classes, right? The math, comp, foreign language are the barriers to graduation for y'all too, at some level. I mean, right? None of us, or most of us, don't want to deal with those. That we want to deal with the things we're more interested in. And so we try to make sure that we're mixing those in. So when they get toward the end of their career, it's realistic to get finished. We have graduation plans that we do with them as juniors to map out the rest of their career. So then if they have to come back, they can. We offer some scholarship opportunities when they come back for some people. Oftentimes the league or the team or their contract has built in tuition and fees and stuff like that. So we work with them to make sure those are taken care of so they don't have that barrier, and work just with anybody coming back wherever they are to get their undergrad degree completed. We also get some credit for that. They're called delayed graduation points under academic progress rate, and so that's a benefit to us as well.
So it says, looking at the population of the University of Arkansas, the female population is getting to a point where we might have to add sports programs. If we do add a sports program here, what do you think it would be?
I don't know, and so I certainly can't speak, for the department in that regard. But great question, by the way. insightful question. When I got here 12 years ago, the male population of school was higher than the female population, and now we're approaching 60-40. I mean, we're getting way out there. 60-40 is a big split between females and males. Like, it's usually more like, 53-47, 52-48, and then percentages, in there. So we're getting pretty far out there. So if we added sports, you're always looking at the, big roster sports, if at all possible. There are a few things out there too. Then again, this is my personal opinion, just so there's no, question about it. I can't speak on behalf of the university right now, but triathlon is an interesting sport for me. My niece was a youth world champion, and that's fascinating to see what that sport really is. And it's growing among females. Acrobatics and tumbling is a thing. Yeah, Sydney, I knew she would nod her head. Acrobatics and tumbling is a really interesting sport. It's a new sport, but it's growing pretty quickly. And it's for gymnasts, youth gymnasts, often cheerleaders, things like that, who are doing those competitive type tumbling runs. And it just does it's a little like old compulsory exercises in gymnastics, where you have to do a certain set of routines and you get scored on those, and multiple people do them in a row. So like that. Acrobatics and tumbling is a really interesting sport for me personally.
Maybe some parting advice to us as we are preparing to enter the job market ourselves full time as we're about to graduate.
I have some good thoughts for you. Always happy to come back and share more. I love talking about this part. I love working with young people. Y'all are so much fun to deal with. So one of the things I think y'all need to make sure you're able to do is work hard, not easy, right? Your generation has figured out how to work easy, and that's not a negative, right? Technology, Zooms, things at your disposal to allow you not to work physically hard or long hours. I used to literally at least once a month spend all night in the office and work the entire next day just to do it, because it was hard. Like, you didn't have technology. You had to write things and do things. But learning that ability, and Melissa, Caitlin, like y'all already know how to work hard, by the way. If y'all don't understand what they do for a living, holy crap. Like, they know how to get up early and stay late and be on time. It's tough. But so learn to work hard, embrace working hard. I love the Marine saying of embrace the suck, right? I'm a runner. I love to, my longest race is about 30 miles or so. And so like embracing that suck and learning that the struggle of life is really cool, actually. It makes life more vivid, right? So let life take you where it's going to take you. Your generation, and again, I say it very clearly or very comfortably, my children are your age. Y'all are so good at having plans, and this is going to happen, then this is going to happen, then this is going to happen. And you have your whole life mapped out. And let life take you where it takes you. I would have never lived in California if I wouldn't have let life just take me there. Didn't know anybody, no reason to have ever worked there. But I loved it. My oldest child was born there and loves saying he's born in California. He thinks it's the coolest thing ever. And so, let life take you. It'll take you where it's supposed to take you. Interact with people, right? Your generation is great at texting, great at putting up a front on social media. You all know that your friends aren't really that cool. You all know that. So stop letting it be. I don't know, like, you know what I mean? I like to have fun with it, but it's also serious because it's a mental health problem. It's a growing mental health problem that you think all your friends are perfect because they only show themselves as perfect. Be willing to be the one that doesn't show themselves as perfect, right? So think about that. And last, I love to do, Josh Lenz was on here before. I do a whole thing in his class sometimes about making decisions. Learn to make a decision. Decisions are hard. It's easy to get down to two possibilities. It's incredibly difficult to get down to one and stick with that decision and don't look back. So learning to make a decision, think about decisions in your life that you're making and how profound they can be, and embrace that thought process. It'll help you down the road.